Want to thank Health IL for the invitation to join this virtual panel during this week, and as we kind of figure out how to crack the code to U.S. market traction. So just a little bit about the Science Center. We are based, or not-for-profit organization based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We really operate at the intersection of academia and startup acceleration. The Science Center has ties to over 30 academic institutions, healthcare institutions, government agencies, and leaders in the emerging technology sectors. So we've really been around for almost 60 years and an anchor in our innovation district in University City. We are, Philadelphia is strategically located between regulatory and financial centers in the US. Washington and New York are just short train rides away, as is Boston. We are a formally designated global soft landing spot. And so we really work with companies all over the world to help them figure out how to enter the US market and avoid some of the pitfalls. So I've got a phenomenal panel here today that bring a lot of experience and insights and advice to give you and share lessons learned when entering the US market. Feel free to put questions in the chat. This can be very much a conversational, interactive hour, and really just want to get you the information that you need as we continue to build those relationships and help out. So with that, I'm going to kind of introduce our panelists, or I'll go around my Zoom where people are landing. And so first, I want to introduce Eli Velasquez.
Awesome. Thank you, Tiffany. It's good to see everybody here. Good afternoon over there, and good morning to us. So my name is Eli Velasquez. I serve as a capital advisor to the Science Center, helping them think through what the capital strategy is going to look like internally and externally. But I serve a couple of other different roles as well. I'm also on the board of the Angel Capital Association. That's the world's largest professional society of angel investors. And so there's about 275 angel networks, family offices, and platforms. And it comprises about 15,000 accredited investors. And so that organization offers both education, network building, training, policy development. And so that gives me line of sight into where the angel community is moving and what it's looking to accomplish across the US and other parts of the globe. The other hat that I wear is managing partner and co-founder of Investors of Color. That's a national network of Black, Latinx, Asian, and other diverse accredited investors in the US looking to close the racial funding gap. And that includes everything from individual angels, family offices, corporate, athlete entertainers, all looking to mobilize capital across the capital stack into early stage ventures. So very happy to be here.
Great, thanks. Karen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Karen Griffith-Grega. My background is a combination of 30 years of venture capital and operations. I've done healthcare investing throughout those 30 years, mostly in seed and Series A digital health and medical device companies. In June of 2020, I transitioned from my last venture firm called Dream Adventures to one of my portfolio companies where I'm COO. We are a medical device and test diagnostic company. We have a mobile PCR machine that literally fits into the palm of your hand. So the vision is the power of a central lab in the palm of your hand. We've been very fortunate to grow dramatically during the pandemic, and we ourselves are marching down the 510K path with a series of our products.
Thanks so much. Aron.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Tiff. Aron Starosta, Vice President of Commercialization and New Ventures at the Science Center. We are the site and the group that would work with you if you're interested in entering the US market. We are the people that would help you do so, give you an address, give you a home, give you resources, access to the regulatory, the legal, the things that you would need to be effective here. We do that through a program called 3401, and as Tiff mentioned before, Global Soft Landing. In addition to that, we have programs like accelerators that are designed to help you get some funding and help you commercialize within the US space. So we're experts on the transition into the US entity and the US marketplace and helping you get here and then succeeding here. And as a point of reference, Karen just mentioned Biomeme. Biomeme was one of the companies that did go through one of our accelerators and was much, much smaller when we had them and is now just blown up and was able to attract the talents of Karen and others as well. So that's the types of companies that we work with.
Great, thanks. And Harm.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sherbier. I'm currently the Chief Medical Information Officer at Health Share Exchange, HSX. That is the Health Information Exchange organization in the greater Philadelphia region, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, connecting over 500 parties, sharing health information and patient data to make sure that patients have the same quality and information of care wherever they go. Before that, I was the Chief Medical Information Officer at Mainline Health. That's a 5-hospital health system right outside Philadelphia. Very involved in purchasing, in buying health IT solutions and figuring out how solutions fit into the overall health IT portfolio. And I think that's an approach that will be helpful for today's conversations. Looking forward to talking to you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so great transition. And so, you know, the fundamental issue is that we've seen kind of specific to Israel, but, you know, global companies in general, we know there's tremendous technology and innovation in Israel, right? But consistently over the last decade, as kind of startup nation has evolved and we've had these interactions with Israeli companies coming to the US market, wanting to sell or commercialize their products and services to the US healthcare market. There's consistently a gap there for a number of different reasons. What have you guys seen? What do you see as the biggest gap? The biggest gaps and challenges for companies entering the US market, and when's the right time to start thinking about that?
So I've probably worked with Israeli companies on and off for 20 years in a venture capacity. And one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen in that role is often the companies have really interesting validation with their health systems in Israel, but that experience actually provides 0 data points on the go-to-market in the US, and that the buying process in Israel is so fundamentally different than it is in the US that, at least from the venture perspective, the entrepreneurs expect that their health system experience in Israel helps to validate and de-risk the go-market. And it actually doesn't. It validates and de-risks some of the patient experience and some of the clinical stuff, but on the actual go-to-market side, it provides no data points in the United States.
Yeah, that's great insight. And, you know, Harm, I'm interested in your perspective. You know, one of the things that I've heard related to US commercialization is if I am an Israeli startup entrepreneur and I've got colleagues in, say, New York and Boston at prestigious academic medical institutions, and there's an interest in the technology there, that automatically translates to successful commercialization broadly. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your experience in that decision making? And then also, you know, talking a little bit about, I know you see it through HSX, the differences between purchasing habits for, say, a Penn Medicine and then like a Mainline Health.
Yeah. Let's start with that portfolio management. I think the important thing to realize for any startup, any technology company, that it's a really busy space. From the perspective of a CMIO or a CIO at the health system, is I'm getting emails and calls almost every day about things I could be buying, things that are valuable, things that help patient safety, things that help my ROI. Every day, those emails come in, and it's a very busy space. It's very tempting as a CMIO to at some point to start ignoring those, because so that is a difficult way to get in. At the same time, to handle that flood of incoming opportunities, most health systems put in place a very controlled and I would say rigid process of portfolio management, in which every incoming opportunity, every technology, every device gets put through a set of steps, a process to see, does this product, does this service fit our overall healthcare strategy? Does it fit our IT environment overall? Does it address the right number of clinical users or patient opportunities? So you need to go through a set of hurdles that are very methodical, and in which you basically compete with many, many, many other opportunities for a tiny slice of both budget, dollar budget, also people budget. How can my IT staff handle yet another application to install, to integrate, and to support? So you need to show that both from a financial perspective, you are the best buy, but also from an effort perspective, you are the best tool to come into our overall health system portfolio. Portfolio management is tough. I think every health system has put it in place to manage and somehow make sense of their growing IT environment. But it's difficult for you as a provider to kind of find your way in that. I don't think it's enough to have one person who you know in the hospital. That is not enough. I think you need high-level sponsorship at an organization to be able to go through the portfolio management.
That's great. And how do those processes, how might they differ in a academic setting versus kind of a large community health system?
Yeah, I don't know that is the big difference in terms of size. Both are large organizations, and both are therefore have a certain layer of hierarchy and bureaucracy and processes. I also, but let's make a different distinction. Rather than looking at the large health systems, there are also many smaller practices and small organizations that buy. So small independent practices, ambulatory mostly. They could be oncology practices. They could be surgery practices that are independent from the large health system. So those are opportunities, and they typically have a far less rigorous process in place, but they also have far less infrastructure available for you. So it's a mixed bag there. But I think that is a different approach. Once you're established in one or multiple smaller practices, that may be a stepping stone into some of the larger health systems, because all of these practices are somehow connected into larger health systems.
Yeah. Aron, how do you and your team help, have you guys helped historically connect global companies to healthcare systems, customers, or at least help them answer those critical go-to-market strategy?
Sure. Harm's a great example of somebody that we work with to do those sorts of things, right? So he runs Healthcare Exchange. They have a program called Market Street, which, if you need a big brother to help you into these healthcare systems, that's the way to do it. You go to Healthcare Exchange. They have a tool that allows you to plug into all the healthcare entities around this region. In fact, there's like 500, 13 million lives, I think at this point. I don't remember the exact numbers, and plug them in through that. We build pivot panels, which is an opportunity for you guys to meet with people who are experts in a space. Our scientific advisory committee is made up of some of the leaders of the hospital systems in our area, and they will sit down with you and tell you exactly what you would need to do to catch their interest or be valuable to them. Harm's point about people, and some of it is just setting expectations, right? You come from a country that is very, is excellent at innovation. You've got a $10 million investment from somebody. Everybody's telling you that you're beautiful, that you're wonderful, that you're amazing, that you're incredible, and you are. But then you show up in the US and you expect to just walk in, talk to a few key opinion leaders and be picked up by a healthcare system. That's just not how the US healthcare system works. So sitting with you and saying, okay, here's strategies for how to reach the right people. Here are the things you need to do in order to get where you need to go. Giving you the resources and the time and the direction so that you meet with the right people to get the right information, rather than just being told you're awesome. We're the ones who are going to tell you, here's why you're not awesome, and here's the reasons why. Here are the things you need to fix, or the data you need to gather in order to be successful here.
Great, thanks. Eli, I see you nodding your head a lot.
Yeah, I love all the input. Double down. I see anywhere from 10 to 20, sometimes 30 deals a week. They come in through LinkedIn, they come through social media, they come in through cold emails, they come in through warm referrals. We're seeing a lot, right? We see a lot of information. I was recently asked as early as yesterday, what do you like to see that attracts your attention? And the first thing I want to see is that that entrepreneur has a very succinct understanding of the problem that they're trying to solve in the market that they're trying to enter. So I want to understand that they've studied it, they've analyzed it, they know it well. Two, I want to understand the economics of the business opportunity, right? So they understand what the pathway to market is going to be. And then three, they have at least an inkling of how they want to scale that business opportunity. So for me, if I can't see that business scaling across multiple geographies, frankly, across the United States, it's not really going to be attractive to me. I call those hyper localized deals. And that to me, they're going to usually stay within a certain geography or within a certain market segment that is not going to raise the attention of other investors that I have in my network. So definitely that's going to be important. The other thing that you need to consider is the pandemic has upended innovation and regulatory pathways and things of that nature, where people are starting to be more open to how they look at how innovations get to market. So the old way of looking at it is changing and it's evolving. We see in a lot of health tech, a lot of telehealth, right? A lot of medical devices, diagnostics. I mean, they are coming out of all sorts of different areas. And so the way that you looked at your competitive landscape before, you need to put a new lens on that and understand that things are changing and evolving, and they're moving at a much faster pace here in the US. So take a much deeper look, take more time to really do a much broader analysis of what's actually happening in the US if this is where you're aiming to go.
Yeah, that's great advice. And, it's funny, I kind of joke that people shouldn't stress out so much about understanding the US healthcare market because we don't understand it either. Right? It's changing so fast. And, it's so complex in terms of the payment structures and, the differences between each state and Medicare. And so it is, I think that's great advice to take the time to really understand and do homework and talk to a lot of different people to nail that customer segment and the commercialization strategy, which kind of brings me to, in the thinking about how to fit the product into the payment structures. And can you guys talk a little bit about the importance of the relationship between reimbursement and commercialization and the need to really understand that early?
I can start with that. I think, obviously, in the United States, since the Accountable Care Act, we are moving towards something called value-based care, which means healthcare organizations, accountable care organizations, practices take risk for their set of patients, for their population. The old model was fee for service. I get paid for what I do. The current model is promoting me keeping my population healthy. There are many practices that have jumped on that payment model and make that their entire business model. For example, Oak Street Health or ChenMed, they go full on at risk and make sure that their patient population stays healthy and keeps their utilization low. That is a very interesting section of the market because those providers and those organizations are benefiting from keeping people healthy. They will therefore apply technology and apply all kinds of services to help them do that and help them maintain their patient population. At the same time, that fee for service hasn't gone away. As a matter of fact, well over 80% of US healthcare dollars are still spent in a fee for service mode, where more is better, right? Where I just need to do more procedures and see more patients. So that volume is still very, very much there. And some organizations are conflicted. They say that their strategy is value-based care, but their life today is very much keeping the beds full. And that is a conflict that you'll see in many organizations today. And you need to figure out where your service or your technology fits better. Are you more a tool or service that helps keep population healthy, then you need to find those organizations that are fully at risk and completely out of value-based care payment model. If not, then you should probably participate in some of the traditional high volume orthopedic surgery, emergency rooms, ORs in general, where volume is still king. So it's a split picture. It's hard.
Mhm.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, commercialization and kind of the reimbursement pathway are so integrated in analysis today that you kind of can't separate the two, right? So if you think about how we commercialize, in the large health systems today, for instance, you have to have obviously your clinical data to support your regulatory pathway, right? But now in health systems and decision making, it's all about the research around the outcomes, right? And so it's a much more holistic analysis in terms of outcomes. It's what happens in real world settings, what is the financial impact, what is the impact on the patient, what is the impact to harm's point, change management, right? Change takes people's mindset, and behavior change takes time. And all this turns into a value prop. So, and then you look at kind of the reimbursement codes, right? Are you going to, in a fee for service model, are you going to slip behind an existing CPT code, which we've all seen tremendous pressure with the reimbursement values of CPT codes? We've seen bundling, right? So things that used to be individually reimbursed are now bundled together. But if you can really show the impact, the value, it might be the right thing to go after your own CPT code, right? Which is complex and takes more time. But if you can show the value, especially in a real world setting, you can go down that path and usually to get a higher reimbursement model. So, I mean, these questions are tough because they really relate to what is the service, what is the product offering, what's the value prop, and all that ties into a regulatory pathway that could be value-based or fee-based, but ultimately it's tied to the value of what you're delivering to the market.
Yep.
So they're not separate. They're highly integrated.
So-
One thing that I want to add to that is I see so many pitch decks that show me the milestones, and then it ends then we get regulatory approval and the story ends there. And I said, no, that's where the story starts, right? Like we need to look at what the trajectory is of your business model. And somehow I think entrepreneurs have fooled themselves into thinking that I just need to convince the investor that I will get regulatory approval and everything will be okay thereafter. And trust me. And I say, I go to the next slide and it doesn't tell me the rest of the story, because to Karen's point, I don't know what the rest of the story is, but I want you to be thinking about it. And I looked at a medical device yesterday and it literally stopped at, ta-da, we get regulatory approval and now we have a happy ending. So we need to be thinking about what that whole analysis is. And I don't need to see all of it, but I want you to be thinking about it and give me some scenarios of where you're looking at the economic opportunity in the business model for sure.
That's great. We have a question in the chat. Could you comment on the impact on startup business models from international markets and how they may have to pivot for the US market? Before we do that, just to take one step back, can you guys explain a little bit, just for in case people aren't familiar with CPT codes and why they matter?
I guess since I mentioned it, I'll bring it on. But when you're in a health system, a health situation, the billing has to be coded to a CPT code. So when a health provider is making a decision about care, that decision making for billing purposes has to be tied to the CPT code. So there's, there's a whole art and science around these reimbursement codes that, to your point earlier, Tiffany, they can differ by payer, they can differ by integrated health system. Usually the easier path is to find an existing code that you can fit into. But certainly there's lots of experts that can guide entrepreneurs down the path of pursuing their own.
Yeah, we could have a whole panel on, and I think there is, Michelle Shields is doing a virtual panel at Health IL this week on reimbursement. So if you guys haven't register for that one, absolutely, she's a great resource. So talk a little bit about what you guys have seen. If I'm a Israeli company and maybe I've commercialized in Israel, maybe started commercializing in Europe, how might those companies have to think about pivoting when they come to the US market?
So I'll jump in on that one, and I think Harm should as well, though we'll see if he does. But the single payer versus the multi-payer system is a big difference between the two. But in addition to that, just the fact that we don't have centralized electronic health records. I mean, typically we just do not have the ability, the cost. I'll go back a bit to what we said a while ago, making sure that IT is engaged when you sell to somebody. A lot of people try and do deals in the United States, and the information technology group isn't present in the room when the deals are being made. And as soon as that deal starts to progress, IT steps in and says, no, we're not going to do it. We don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the team. We don't have the time. We don't have the security. We have all these questions. No, we're just going to put a stop to it. And everybody up to the CEO can be into that program, into that product that you have. You have the CPT codes, you have the plan, you have everything, and they'll just shut it all down. So you have to recognize that being able to interface with each individual hospital is part of the game. And so that can be very costly, independent of the costs it takes to sell and develop your device. But then also being able to navigate the payer system here, being able to figure out who and how and what the value is to whom. I mean, the way you talk about it, all of these things are nuanced and different. We're constantly, we deal with a lot of Canadians internationally, and the Canadians, we have to tell them to be more assertive. Typically, when we work with the Israeli companies, we have to tell them to be less assertive. There's sort of a cultural way to enter the US market and speak about things that I think resonate with the listener in a way that make them want to work with you further as well. So the list is long, but those are just a few things that are different between a European market and an Israeli market, when we deal with companies. Harm, did you want to?
Yeah, there are so many angles that you're touching on, Aron, and that's good. I want to mention one thing that's the buyer's mindset. And it has a little bit to do with the portfolio management I talked about earlier. But as you know, the US today is dominated by a few very large EMR, electronic medical record vendors. Epic, Cerner, Meditech would be the top three. And all three, but primarily Epic, but the others also have promoted a single vendor mindset in their clients. They have promoted the idea that stick with us, we'll take care of everything. You don't need anything else, we'll take care of it. And that has been very appealing to CIOs who now need to buy only one from one vendor, need to deal only with one company, and chief medical information officers who, they work on behalf of the doctors and the nurses. And those doctors don't want to have to deal with multiple systems. They want one thing to work with. So the single vendor mindset is fully ingrained in many large health systems, health organizations. And it's very difficult for new vendors to break through that wall, because usually the answer is, oh, that is very, very nice. Epic says they will be developing that too. It's about a year away, and we'll wait for that. And that is such a downer answer that you would get from your CIOs and CMIOs, but you need to find a way around that. I think integration. And
Epic's not doing it, Harm. They're just saying.
I was just saying what they say. I'm not sure if it, I mean, so you're right. It may not happen at all, but it's the mindset, right? That they're really protective of their single vendor philosophy. And I'm hoping personally, that will at some point open up. There's so much focus on interoperability, on the ability to connect apps into the overall EMR systems, especially using FHIR as a connecting technology. I think the technology is there to connect multiple systems in. It's the mindset in the CIO and then the CMIO that still holds us back from incorporating other things. Now, through HSX, which is where what Aron mentioned, Health Share Exchange, we try to have a group of technology partners who are already integrated into the technologies to make them one step closer to being integrated into the health system environment. And I think that may be a way to partner with health information exchanges where there's a lots of interoperability and connectivity to make that, to break through that mindset, because now from a CMIO perspective, it's like, well, they're already in my health information exchange. So they are kind of already in my network, right? They're not completely foreign or new to my organization. They are already somehow part of my ecosystem. And that may make it more acceptable and more easy for them to accept a tool. So that single vendor mindset, I think, is an obstacle that all of us, both US and non-US companies, deal with. It locks the market down and it kind of stifles innovation, but it's something we need to find a way through.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of that. One of my portfolio companies was rolling out an implementation at Penn Medicine. And there was seriously, 1 to 2 lines of code functionality that Epic had coded incorrectly. So the integration of my portfolio company solution wasn't working properly because of a coding error on Epic's part. And at the end of the day, my company had to pay several $100,000 to pay for the implementation of this, what should have been a fix. And the CIO had to be jumping up and down, screaming in order to get this implemented. Like, it's really that single vendor mindset is really challenging. And requires perseverance.
That's a great point. Karen, you mentioned earlier talking about the importance of evidence and outcomes for commercialization. And, that's something that we've seen just increasing every year, over the last 10, 15 years. Can you talk a little bit about, I'm interested from the panel in general, the importance of US clinical trial data or not, right? So we all know it's very expensive to do clinical trials in the US. What is the appetite for accepting global clinical trial data for US market adoption?
In my perception, and Harm, I'm interested in your perception, the clinical trial data is the first step, right? You have to show the data supporting the efficacy of your product in a clinical trial setting. That's just the entry fee. And what's interesting is there are, as data has proliferated, as systems have proliferated, there are approaches, depending on your solution, that can make a clinical trial more manageable, right? There's certain groups that have biorepositories that make doing the clinical trial. So there's ways to go about the clinical trial that can make it, more risk adjusted, just from an execution perspective. But that's just step one. That's just the fundamental data. As we've seen time and time again, the health environment, clinical trials by definition are contrived, right? There's a population that's included, there's population that's excluded. It's very controlled versus, we like to use the term wicked problem, which is actually a term from like an article in the 70s, but it's, as you might imagine, just a really complicated problem to solve, right? And so because of the portfolio management, because of the interrelationships, health systems today, they're wicked problems to solve. And when you're going into a real world setting and trying to deliver your solution in a real world setting, all of a sudden you're having to deal with all kinds of different populations. You're having to not only look at the clinical outcome, but also the financial outcome and patient satisfaction and how that may affect a HEDIS score and so forth. So, you know, it's not easy problems to solve, this whole clinical outcomes approach. But the good news is you get on the other side, and now you have both the clinical data and the outcomes data supporting your story. And I think in the market, we've seen time and time again where you can put those data sets together with some key opinion leaders, and then you start to see just momentum in the marketplace in terms of customer acquisition. So, you know, in the US market, you have to be prepared to invest a great deal, you know, up front. So Eli said it, first you have to start with the thinking and the planning. And then, you know, you have to execute through the clinical data and the outcomes data. But when you come out the other side, the market's massive and the rewards can be massive. But you have to mentally prepare for and timeline prepare for what it takes to get there. And I had a portfolio company once that was selling into this very large health system and was really trying to navigate that decision-making path. They had 40 people in the decision matrix, right? And so as you can imagine, each one of those individuals has their own lens on how they're evaluating it. So the more robust, and you know, when you do outcomes research or outcomes analysis, not everything's going to be perfect, right? But you kind of have to hit all the buckets: clinical, financial, patient satisfaction, and clinician satisfaction.
Each of those 40 people also have 10 or 15 other technologies that they're considering, right? So you're trying to convince 40 people who all have other distractions and competing interests in mind. It's hard. I want to add one thing, Karen, to what Karen said. Clinical trials, totally important for medical devices, diagnostic, therapeutic, and for medications. Absolutely. For software, not as much. There really is not as much need or actually experience in doing clinical trials for software. Many software firms do come with an ROI statement, and they tend to be somewhat cheesy. Every software vendor will come with an ROI statement where the math may not always work. So I think it's important to have an ROI, but keep it very, very clean and very achievable. For example, don't count avoided legal expenses as part of your ROI. That's weird math. It has to truly be ROI in my daily life, not avoiding things that I might have otherwise not avoided. That's kind of fuzzy. But I think clinical trials are not so much important for software. It's more a fairly clear return on investment statement or picture that you might expect.
Let me add a little bit to that, Harm, as well. I like where that's going, because I was going to touch on, you know, digital health, wellness,
yes,
you know, where we're seeing health tech, where the regulatory pathway is may not going to be the traditional one or non-existent, right? But where we do want to see the same sort of traction is on the evidence and outcome of users. And so we want to understand that you are onboarding users. You can bring these users on a consistent basis and a recurring basis. And you have, again, remember what I mentioned in the beginning, you have the ability to scale this across different segments, different geographies, and we want to see it start to transcend across these different areas. So if you say, well, you know, I have a mental health app, that's great. There's 60 others that are out there. I want to understand how you're going to replicate that user base, and the evidence and outcomes in this particular case is going to be, tell me how many users you have and tell me what the plan is to scale that across the board. And to Karen's point, that's going to be very expensive, right? So from the investor's perspective, for healthcare and life sciences, there's a big arm that's extended towards the venture that the venture has to push towards to finally get close to the investor. And it's your job to overcome that hesitation of risk, right? And overcome that hesitation of all the necessary pathways. Even though there's a significant amount of investment, there's a lot of work that has to be navigated for the investor to finally feel comfortable. And I would say that the investors that are investing in the space are the least risk averse. And they're going to go out there, they're going to say, look, I believe in the product, I believe in the company, and I understand it. The minute there's a lack of understanding, you're going to see that arm go out and say the venture needs to go through a lot more hoops to prove to me that they're actually delivering what they said that they needed to deliver.
Really great. So you talked 40 people in the decision-making process. That's a lot. What, we hear a lot about the shift from volume to value, value analysis committees, complex purchasing decision processes, which brings me to, the customer isn't just the physician anymore, right? It's just not that finding that one person. I think that's been clear in this conversation. Can you talk a little bit about the types of customer, who are the customers? What does that team of 40 people look like in terms of their roles and authority and influence? And ultimately, is there like one person that says, you know what, we're going to get this done?
I think Harm's itching to answer.
I think, yeah, from my perspective, there is a broad group of decision makers, but out of those 40, there's a few that are really the key decision makers and that help the rest come along. I think those are in many cases, the chief information officer, especially I'm speaking digital health only, right? Not devices, digital health. Chief information officer and chief medical information officer, that partnership, those two, the CIO from an IT infrastructure perspective, the CMIO from a clinical user perspective. If you have those two on board, they will in most cases help you find the sponsorship for your product or your service and bring the other 40 along. I see the CIO and the CMIO. Now, sometimes the CIO and the CMIO are aligned and sometimes they're opposed. It depends a bit on what you're trying to achieve. So you need to figure that out. That all depends on both your service, your product, and also on the organization. Some organizations are more collaborative, some are a bit more opposed to each other. But either way, to me, those are the two gatekeepers to the process.
And what about for like devices?
There is usually a biomed department. And the biomed department can be part of the IT organization or can be part of the medical organization. That depends a little bit. So, but either way, since no device today, every device today comes with a digital health piece, somehow is integrated. There are very few standalone devices anymore. So somehow that still leads back to the CIO. So I would say biomed and CIO for biomed devices.
And it seems like sometimes to Aron's point, the CIO can sometimes be the more difficult path, just because the constraint of resources, lack of bandwidth, how time consuming change management is throughout the organization. Yep.
The single vendor mindset, absolutely there.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I want to encourage everyone, feel free to, put your questions in the chat. I'm happy to field those. You can send them to everyone or you can send them directly to me. So kind of thinking about then, if I'm an Israeli startup, early stage company, I think I'm taking away the importance of planning, taking the time to plan, starting with the end in mind, right? What's that ultimate goal and working back there? What are the relationships that need to be in place? What's the data information that you need to do for positioning your product or service for successful commercialization? But let's talk a little bit about funding and working with US-based investors. What special concerns, because we see all the time, when we interact with Israeli startups, everyone needs funding, right? I want to meet with the VC. I want to meet with the strategic. But a lot of times they're just not, there's a disconnect there. Can you guys talk about what advice you might have to navigate those situations.
I can start, and I think it would be helpful for everyone to hear a little bit of the investor landscape in the U.S. right now. I say that there's a lot of froth. There's been a massive emergence of emerging managers and emerging funds. At least 193 that I've counted so far. There is a whole new deployment of new angel groups. There's a whole new deployment of early stage capital when it comes to equity crowdfunding. There is a lot of competition amongst investors to get into deals. So there's more money in the market than we know what to do with. Last year in 2020 was almost a record year for angel investing into early stage capital. So startups basically have their choice, but at the same time, there's a lot of competition. So because there's a lot of new investors in the market, at least a lot of new angel and early stage venture, there's also a lot of unknown quantities as to whether people actually have the expertise and the ability to stay with you and partner with you long term. So doing a lot of due diligence on where those investors are. The Angel Capital Association has a whole directory of every angel network in their membership. There's PitchBook that has emerging managers and whatnot that you can look at early stage and late stage VCs so that you can do your research. So I would say that you're walking into a very crowded space of investors that, again, going back to the planning, you're going to have to do significantly much more planning. It's very difficult even for me to find different niche investors. So we take a lot of time to do research on where those investors have a portfolio that aligns with health tech, med tech, life science, pharma, biopharma. So it's a very, very niche group that we have to thread the needle through to get them. Then the other thing that I'll mention is venture. True venture has shifted into traditional venture. So you have this large gap between early stage up to Series A, and then Series B type companies and ventures, they're way over there. And so there's this massive gap where we're trying to understand, where do we close the gap and how do we help facilitate more capital and syndicated capital into these early stage ventures so that they can carry that capital much longer to the point where they reach that later stage VC. So, be thinking about what diligence you need to be doing, because the investor landscape seems to be ever getting frothier and frothier, and we're seeing that trend continue even into 2021 and likely into 2022.
And is there any unique challenges, Eli, for global startups, or is there kind of a growing appetite for U.S. investors in foreign startups?
What we have seen traditionally, and this was kind of the standard, was, well, there's a lot of deals in the US, so we're not really going to be too interested in looking at global deals. They have to have a really strong position in the US with a strong strategy. That has doubled down. It's very, very difficult for us to be looking at Latin American deals, European deals, Southeast Asian deals, because investors are saying, I have what I need here in the US. I have to compete with my investor neighbor over this deal in the US, and I need to outcompete him or her to get in on this deal. So for global startups, it makes it that much more competitive to get in front of those investors, which is where a lot of the advice you're getting here is positioning yourself very strongly and effectively in the US is a much better play at this current state of play for investment.
That's great. Karen, Aron, do you have any insights, advice?
Well, seeking capital is just like any other portfolio management strategy. I mean, this is an obvious statement to me, but as an entrepreneur, you want to really analyze the investors that you're talking to and understand, are they bringing just capital? Are they bringing experience, whether that's startup experience or health system experience or consumer, digital health experience, and do they have the connections to drive you through? And so as you're looking at the capital you're raising, ideally you want this portfolio effect of investors, you call it the Holy Grail, right? They have domain expertise, capital, startup expertise, and can open doors for you. So you really want to analyze who you're talking to and what they can bring to the table. Because it, to Eli's point, ideally, your funding partners are long-term partners for you, right? This is to, to build a very large, successful company. It's in the health world, especially, it's not overnight success. It's a long road, and you want a partnership with your funding partners that is long-term. So, entrepreneurs often kind of get in a position where their analysis is like, well, it's capital and that's what I need.
Mhm.
But you actually have to look at who you're partnering with from a long-term lens, and can they potentially meet those needs?
Aron, we consistently see, one or two global startups in the launch lane accelerator. What has been their experience? Any insights you can share, and for our global portfolio, and how they've been able to navigate this?
Yeah, I think that the Israeli group in general has an advantage when it comes to investing in the US, because there's so many Israeli investors in the US who are looking to support Israeli companies entering into the marketplace. I wanted to throw that out there. So that's one. But two, I think that what I'm going to answer now also applies to the international companies that join us. I think companies undervalue commercialization as a tool for investments when they enter the US markets. And what I mean by that is oftentimes, and there's a question here from Boad about, easier to start in Israel with development trials and testing. But I think one of the things that's off that list is customers, right? Consumers who are using the product and showing how it works, what the value of that is, and generating some income. Because one of the things that I think really helps with companies entering into the US marketplace is if they have a small income stream from somewhere else, because for a number of reasons. One, it'll help with operation. But two, it proves that people will buy the product. It's not just something that's in your head is valuable. And then three, when you go to negotiate with an investor for terms, you're in a much stronger position because you have revenue than when if you just go and negotiate without any revenue at all. And so one of the things that we focus on primarily with our accelerators that really isn't something that you see a lot in the US with accelerators, most of them focus on taking investment. We do that too, but we do it indirectly. We focus on trying to have you get voice of consumer, talking to folks that Harm knows, getting advisors like Karen, discussing, investments with Eli. These are all people that you would connect with to help you figure out who's going to pay for your product, why they're going to pay for your product, what would they pay for your product, and maybe even get a few of them to start paying for your product. And if you can't get that going in the US, then trying to create trials or opportunities that allow you to, if you complete X, Y, and Z, then, your contract turns into something that pays you some money. So a lot of the work that we do with our foreign national companies that come in is setting up those structures, setting up their US entities so that they are seen as a US company, because I think that really counts for a lot too. It's perception. It doesn't really change who you are or what you are, but it's just something that people want to see. And then giving you that pathway to commercialization thinking that will help you structure your business going forward, from the moment that you step foot on the soil here.
That's great. And just to kind of, I think you did, you addressed the question that in the chat. I think just to kind of close the loop on that, again, it's thinking about the end in mind. And if the end is US commercialization, when is the best situation to start entering the US market? And really, while you're doing your development, your trials, your testing in Israel, when do we start talking to the States, recognizing we have just a few minutes left?
Probably do it right away. I mean, there's no too early to start. If you're looking to enter the US market, then you should be talking to somebody in the US on day one. You should have contacts, or you're trying to find, sources of information from the US from the minute that you start. If you are, if this is an afterthought, you've already made your money in Israel and Europe, and you're happy there, and now you're thinking you want to conquer the US, that's fine too. But if your plan is to enter the US, then, design for the US.
Yeah. Great insight. We see that happen not enough. So earlier is always better to make sure that your development, your trials, your testing that you're doing in Israel are addressing the questions that the US market wants to see in the way they want to see it. Well, we're just at time, so I want to thank our distinguished panel. Really appreciate your time and insight and wisdom. I want to thank all of you who attended, and feel free to reach out to us if you've got questions or if we can be helpful along the way. You can find us through our website, sciencecenter.org. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on Twitter. But we're here to help, and we look forward to supporting promising Israeli innovations reach the US market faster. All the best for a wonderful Health IL week, and stay safe into the new year.